Hello again. It's April 22nd, 2020, and we're done with the book of James, and today is Earth Day. So we're going to look at a very weird moment in the book of Acts where Paul and Barnabas, two of the earliest church fellas who are critical in establishing the young church, get mistaken by a bunch of people in a town called Lystra. They get mistaken as gods. They get to town and there's healings happening, and so people come to them as though they themselves are God. And so Paul is going to try to correct them. So here's what it says. It says, "But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard of it, they tore their garments and rushed out into the crowd, crying out, 'Men, why are you doing these things? We also are men of like nature with you, and we bring you good news, that you should turn from these vain things to a living God, who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. In past generations he allowed all the nations to walk in their own ways, yet he did not leave himself without witness. For he did good by giving you rains from heaven and fruitful seasons, satisfying your hearts in food and gladness.' Even with these words, they scarcely restrained the people who were offering sacrifices." What we read here is of a group of people who are living one sort of way of life, and they know that when they approach gods or any sort of divine thing, they bring sacrifices. That's what they know. They know they live in a world where people are sick and they do not get well. That's what they know. Even when they are corrected by Paul, when Paul teaches them how to interpret the situation they're in more helpfully, more humbly, he refuses to be called God. Even then, the people still struggle to not just give him something. Change is hard. We know this. It often hurts. Embracing something different is always threatening. And there are hard questions like this. Does embracing a change undermine everything that came before it? Like if you always ate one way and now you switch and you eat a different way, does that somehow belittle the way you were eating? If you always believed the world worked one way, perhaps in a godless way or a non-triune God way, and you become Christian, does that undermine everything that came before it? I don't think so. I think we've learned in our processes. We've grown in our processes. We don't have to fear change that way. Does change mean that we were wrong in the past? Maybe it does. But is it better to stay wrong than to admit that we once were wrong and now we've seen a new way? What if we were wrong about something that was really important? That makes it that much harder, doesn't it? Today's April 22nd, 2020, and that means we are marking the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. 50 years means that we can't declare ignorance of the problems. We can't pretend that we didn't know any better. You see, there was a time when we caught all the fish we could catch and we said, look, there's no way we'll catch them all. And then we had to shut down the cod fisheries. We looked out at the mountains and we saw the trees and we said we could never cut so many. And then we did. We can't possibly argue anymore about this stuff. We know we are impacting the very climate on which we depend. There was a time when we could say we didn't know, but like those people in Lystra, that time is past. For Christians, this is a challenge. The Bible says God is God of all the earth. It says this repeatedly. There are trees in the very beginning of the Bible, and there's trees in the very end of the Bible, and there's trees all the way through it. If you take time, you'll see in the text there is nature from top to bottom. It says we're to steward nature, we're to care for it, we're to love it the way God did in making it. We're to find God in it. We're to recognize his glory in it. Too often, Christians are of zero help in all of this. For whatever reason, we just don't seem to care. Too often, we're completely indistinguishable from the culture around us when it comes to these things. We buy just as much as everybody else. We buy cheap junk just like everybody else does. We buy fast fashion just like everybody else does. We eat the same foods as everybody else. And all of this together means we have an enormous ecological impact when we're supposed to be treading more lightly. There's a Buddhist poet that I've always loved. We actually had we had a whole poem of his read at our wedding. Gary Schneider, he once wrote, "Stay together, learn the flowers, go light." His point was we needed to stay together in community, one another, holding each other's hands. Learning the flowers meant looking at nature, observing nature, coming to appreciate nature, and in doing so, we would go light. We would tread more carefully. We would avoid stepping on plants we don't want to step on. We wouldn't chop the top off mountains, that sort of thing. Like I said, though, it's 2020, so that means not only 50 years of marking Earth Day, it means that we mark it this year mostly from home. If you're like most people, you're watching the news, watching it endlessly, and it's mostly scary and it's mostly bad. There's a great cartoon where husband and wife are in bed at night, and the husband's looking at his iPad or tablet or whatever, and the wife says, "Oh, honey, put it away. It'll all be worse in the morning," which is a little bit what it feels like. But if you take the time to actually look, you can see nature healing right before your eyes. CBC Today actually has a thing up, a very short video where you can see panes of cities where one side is the before and one side is the after, and you can see the air pollution dissipating. There's photos now of shipwrecks where drones fly over the water and you can look down and you can see shipwrecks where normally you can't see anything because the water is so polluted. We're already noticing that there's a growth amongst many urban animals. There's a baby boom happening, and it happened already. That's how fast nature can recover from some of what we've been doing to it. We can see the earth is starting to heal. We can see fish where there weren't fish. It's just amazing to see this. And so I think we have to ask ourselves a hard question. Whether you're Christian or not, hopefully if you're still watching this, you'll get to the end. The question is, should we go back to things just because the door's open? Are we comfortable with normal? Are we comfortable with the impact our lives are having on the planet? All the toing and froing, all the entertaining, all the feasting, all the buying, all the selling. When we look out and we see nature literally bouncing back, that should give us pause to consider how we've been living. Is it fair? Is it right? Is it good? I don't know about you, but the kind of car I drive is utterly irrelevant most of the time, and right now it is totally irrelevant. We're April 22nd, and I have 7/8 of a tank of gas in my van, and I filled it in March. I don't know that I want to go back to that normal, where I spend more than that on gas, where I contribute to the smog, where I contribute to the carnage of roadkill, where I contribute to the degrading of environmental places, stealing of habitats and places for animals to live. I don't know that I want to go back to that. And yet I know, like the people in Lystra, it would be very difficult to actually not go back. On Earth Day, I would suggest you reflect a little bit about these things. Maybe take a walk in nature if you still can, or go online and look at various places where we can see nature bouncing back. There's lots and lots of resources. We Christians are called to do better at this. We must do better at this, and we can see the Christian story, the resurrection story, happening right before our eyes as the world recovers. It is not too late for the world to recover. It is part of the glory of God, the magnificence of His creation, that it can bounce back, just like Jesus comes back out of that grave. I'm going to end this with a psalm. The start of a psalm, Psalm 100, goes like this: "Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come into His presence with singing." You see, all the earth can rejoice in God, and God rejoices in all the earth. When we say Amen, what we're saying is, make it so. Make it so.